kind of forgot to update on my reading because I'm so focused on getting everything together for the reviews of my most recent arc that I read. But I have picked up another book. It is called Most Ardently by Gabe Cole Novoa, I think is the name. It is a remix of Pride and Prejudice where Lizzie is actually a trans man, and I'm about 30% of the way through. This is not just Pride and Prejudice, but they're both boys, as in, like, the story carries on the same as it would, but Lizzie happens to be a boy. It is specifically a reimagining of the story of how would events be different if Darcy had met, in this story, Oliver, in context of Oliver being a boy. Given the time period, Oliver is not like out as a trans man. There's a couple people who know that he is actually a boy, even though everyone assumes he's a girl. But otherwise, it's very hush hush. It's a thing he has to be very careful about people finding out because, like, obviously that's not an accepted thing in this era. And so we do still have the normal meeting of Darcy and Elizabeth, where it's at the Meryton Ball, and Darcy says something very rude regarding, like, Lizzie not being worth dancing with, yada yada. But then they meet a second time when Oliver is actually able to be himself because he goes out to a fair and he goes to Charlotte's house. Charlotte does know that he's actually a man and keeps a couple outfits at her place for him. And so he can walk into her place as a girl and then leave as a boy and go do the things he wants to do as a boy. That's the context in which he has his second interaction with Darcy. And so he gets to have insights into Darcy as a person that Lizzie in the original telling never would have been privy to because she would never see him in those contexts. Certainly not that early into knowing him. And so it is definitely like it is a different story. There are definitely, it's obviously following the same plot beat and like heavy overlap with the timeline of events of the original Pride and Prejudice, like the part I'm at right now. Spoilers for Pride and Prejudice. I'm at the part where Jane is forced to ride to Netherfield on horseback, not in a carriage, during a rainstorm, and so Jane gets sick, and then Lizzie goes to check on her. In this case, Oliver goes to check on her, and they end up staying at Netherfield for a while Jane recovers. That leads to some, like, if you don't know the original story, that leads to some like forced proximity situations between Lizzie and Darcy where they like end up in more like casual social environments of just like hanging out in the parlor in the evening and that sort of thing. And there's some like important conversations and insights and stuff there. But obviously in this story, there's a different layer to it because Oliver has met Darcy in a context where Darcy thought he was a woman. And then he met Darcy in a context where Darcy thought or understood that he is a man. But Darcy doesn't know that those two are the same person. He doesn't know that Oliver is also Lizzie. And now Oliver is encountering Darcy again in a context where Darcy can only see him as Lizzie. Oliver obviously cannot present as a man right now. So I think it's going to be an interesting back and forth in terms of the different sides that Oliver gets to see of Darcy and how that colors his perception. And I don't know, I'm interested to see how that's explored. Took me a little bit of like, I had a little bit of back and forth because I was like, oh, but like Pride and Prejudice is like a hate to love story, and this isn't going to be a hate to love story because Oliver is getting to know Darcy so well in such a like comfortable, maybe not comfortable isn't the right word, but like a much more friendly dynamic because like Darcy is more just awkward rather than being truly like abrasive in his interactions with Oliver. But I just have to remind myself that like this isn't Pride and Prejudice. This is like taking these characters and imagining them into a different situation, and then how would that change the way that they interacted and the way that events unfolded. I'm enjoying it so far. I do also have to kind of like take things at a bit of a, I think some of the language and like perspectives on transness and queerness are like slightly anachronistic in that I don't know that a trans person in this era would, I guess I don't know, but like some of the way that the narration talks about it feels very modern, and I can't put my finger on exactly what the issue is. And like the language in general is like, this is obviously not written in the same style of prose or diction as Pride and Prejudice. Like it just isn't. But like that's fine. But I am enjoying it so far. Did I say I'm 30% of the way through? I'm 30% of the way through. So I figured that's like a good place to update, and then maybe I'll update around halfway if I remember, and then probably at the end. That's enough rambling from me. I will update when I have more to say about this book. Okay, bye. I'm just shy of 60% of the way through this book. I think I'm at 58%. I ended up kind of like reading a big chunk yesterday, in part because I was just enjoying it, but also because my hold on Heavenly Tyrant came in, and I've been super anticipating that book. So I borrowed that book, like the ebook through Libby, and I was like kind of stressing a bit because like, oh my god, I need to finish reading this book that I'm currently reading because I wasn't expecting that hold to come in for another 4 weeks because that happens every time. But I need to also have time to read Heavenly Tyrant, and I know that's like, it's a big book. That's going to be 600 or 700 pages. So like I'm going to need to read a lot each day. And I'd read a bunch of this book, Most Ardently. And then I was like, okay, well, oh, how fast am I going to be able to finish this book? And like, how many pages per day am I going to have to read of Heavenly Tyrant in order to get through it before I have to return it? And so I opened it up and actually looked at the page count. It's over 900 pages long. I was like, nope, I can't read that as a library book. I will not get through this book before I have to return it. I'm gonna have to buy the ebook. Shit. So that's why I suddenly jumped to almost 2/3 of the way through this book, or part of the reason. Anyway, all of that is to say, I'm enjoying this book. Again, I think I talked about this in my previous clip. Really need to separate this book from my expectations of Pride and Prejudice when I'm reading it. Not only because, like, obviously the writing is different and it's a bit of a more... to me, in my opinion, the tone of the writing feels more modern. Like, when I'm reading something like Veronica Speedwell, that book feels very... like it feels like is it Victorian or Edwardian? I can't remember. But you know, that, like from an era of the past, just the tone of the writing and the word choice and the phrasing and like all of that feels like it belongs more to that time period than to my own. But reading this book, it feels more modern. Like it doesn't super get into that style of diction and writing and stuff. But also like the plot deviates quite heavily from the original text. One big example, I don't know if this is considered a spoiler. I don't want to get into spoilers of this book. There's antagonistic characters in the original story that are not connected in any way, and in this story they are connected. And I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out, like what's the deal there. Another big difference is like in the original story, spoilers for Pride and Prejudice, the reason why Wickham doesn't like Darcy is because he claims that Darcy kind of cheated him out of his fortune. Like he was promised this inheritance from Darcy's dad, and because Darcy's dad raised him like his own, I think is the story. It's been a while since I read Pride and Prejudice. And Wickham's side of the story is that Darcy just denied him that when he became the head of the family because his dad died. In this version of the story, it's not what it is from the original story. It's something different that is potentially, or at least as far as Oliver can conceptualize, seems to be a cover-up for Darcy's sexuality, which is that he likes men. But I'm also curious about if it maybe still has something to do with his sister, because I know in the original story there's stuff that happens with his sister. So I'm curious to see how all that's gonna tie together. Again, I'm trying to talk about it without getting spoilers, because like I don't super want to do a spoilery review of this book, just because I don't think I'm gonna, one, I don't think I'm gonna have a lot to say, and two, if I do have a lot to say, I don't want to have to edit another 2-hour video. I'm in the process of editing an almost 2-hour long video right now, and I need a short video to edit. Anyway, I'm still enjoying it. I'm liking the differences in the story and how like it makes it feel fresh but still familiar. And I'm really curious to see like how these differences are going to play out. I also really, really liked, there's a scene at a Molly house, which is an old term for like basically a queer community space. And that was very nice. I liked that. And all the little bits of like, the book is very good at staying very seated in Oliver's gender and experience of dysphoria and euphoria, depending on how he's presenting and how people are perceiving him. And I think that's conveyed very, very well, very effectively. And yeah, I am enjoying this book. I said I didn't want to talk too long, so I'm going to wrap this clip up now. I finished reading Most Ardently by Gabe Novoa today. I think it's a 3.5. I don't think it's quite a 4. It was a good read. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't quite a 4. It was just like a nice, enjoyable book. And I think part of it is I felt like there were some moments that it needed to sit in longer. I think particularly because it's an adaptation, or not an adaptation, a remix of an existing story. It felt like there were some moments where it was just following the expected beat, and I was supposed to feel a certain way because that's the way I feel at that part of the story. Not necessarily that it did a... See, it's hard to articulate because it's not that it didn't explore the characters and establish the stakes, and it wasn't like I had no feeling towards the stakes, but sometimes it just felt like things... Maybe that's the issue. We would be sitting in one conflict, and that would be like... I'm trying not to get too into specifics because it's the same story, but there's things different, so I don't want to get too into what the differences are. So with the Wickham incident, we establish what the difference of the Wickham incident is, and like that's a thing. And then we move into a new scene, and that's kind of like part of that scene in terms of like what the character is reflecting on. But then we quickly move into a new conflict and a new emotion. And then the next scene, we've kind of jumped back to the Wickham conflict. I think that's the order it goes in. But then that's resolved very quickly where like in the middle of the conversation that's happening, Oliver kind of realizes the solution, and not just realizes the solution, but a potential benefit to this solution. And it just kind of felt like I wish we had sat in things longer, because then after that conversation, Oliver is again sitting in the emotion and like is feeling like worried and afraid, but it's like, but in the conversation we established, like, I understand what he's afraid of, but at the same point in the conversation we also established a potential benefit and like reason why it would be a good thing. I don't know, I just felt like maybe some of the emotions we could have sat in longer, and I didn't feel as immersed as I would have liked. Another thing, I talked a bit about how like I can tell that this is like a modern writer writing this, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But there are some moments where I'm pretty sure it was using dialogue from, I don't know if it was dialogue from the novel. It must have been dialogue from the novel, because I think the novel is public domain. The movies wouldn't be public domain, so it shouldn't be dialogue from the films. But there's that most ardently line, and that's in the book. But like, it doesn't match the writing of the like rest of the book, because the rest of the book isn't written like Jane Austen. So like that, some moments felt a little uneven that way. So the prose felt uneven in places, and some of the emotion, it didn't really carry across or like hold as long as I wanted it to. I did still really like it though, and it was a really fast read. I'll give it that. I read this book very quickly. I will also say, and this is like again kind of nitpicky because this is a reimagining, but I felt like some of the characterization choices were a bit odd. I understand that I keep saying I understand this is a reimagining, but like Darcy to me didn't feel like Darcy. He felt a little too like, I don't know if youthful or boyish is the right word, but like there were a lot of scenes with Oliver where Darcy would be like, he's acting in a shy way, but in a more giggly shy way. Giggly isn't quite the right word, but you know what I mean. Whereas in the original text and in most adaptations I've seen, Darcy is shy in an aloof or standoffish way, where it's not that he doesn't have that nervousness, but it comes across much differently than it does here. Reading this one, I have a harder time understanding how, if this is really how Darcy acts, I have a harder time understanding how people would perceive ill will from him, because he just seems like like the only way I can think to describe it is giggly shy, even though he's not giggling, but like more that tone. And also there were some odd moments with Jane where I was like, Jane would not be this forward or aggressive about anything. But again, it's a reimagining, so characters are gonna act differently. But yeah, I did like it was a very accessible, quick read. I did enjoy the trans rep was really, really good. Like I really felt Oliver's frustration and dysphoria and like his fear of not being able to live as himself ever. Like I understood that. And I did like the ending, how again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but there's a thing regarding how Oliver being a son could be what's the right term for it? Confirmed retroactively? Again, trying not to get into spoilers, but it's an interesting little choice. There was an author's note that like touched on that decision and like whether or not it's historically accurate that I really appreciated. All of that is to say, in my rambling, incoherent mess, I did like this book. It was a good read. I maybe knew the source material a little too much and was too nitpicky about it, but there were a few things that just like didn't quite work for me. So it's a 3.5, which is still solid, and I would definitely still recommend reading this. But yeah, I'm gonna figure out something else to read now. Oh, I should do emojis. What emoji should we do for this book? Ooh, there's a peacock on the cover of the book, so maybe a peacock. What else feels Pride and Prejudice-esque? Well, the main character is named Oliver, so maybe an olive. Is that weird? Is that a weird choice? I don't know, you decide. As always, do all the things like comment, subscribe, and yeah, I don't know what I'm reading next. I have a lot of book options right now and it's stressing me out a little because I keep doing way too big of book review things for Patreon and it takes way too long to edit and I need to scale the fuck back. But one of the next books that I have available to read is Heavenly Tyrant, which is like 900 pages long and also one of my most anticipated reads. So I cannot imagine a reality in which I don't talk about that book a lot. But also I need time to be able to actually like sit and focus on that book because I don't think it's going to be light and breezy. Anyway, we'll see what I read next. Okay, bye!